guys, today we're going to be talking about this optic right here. This is the Eotech model 512. Alright, currently these Eotechs are selling for around $450, which in my personal opinion, they're not worth. And the reasons why, I guess I'll go ahead and get into that. There are other model Eotechs that are better. For instance, I have this Eotech right here. This is the EXPS-2. And this is the one that has a QD mount, so you can attach it. This thing's chunky, just like the other one is, but this one's a lower 1/3 co-witness height, so it lines up really well with this hollow sun magnifier with the little spacer right here added in there. I bought this one because I wanted to see, or be able to see, over this N-Force light. Now this isn't my favorite light on the planet. Eventually, maybe down the road, I might replace it with something, but I like the placement where it's at. I like how light it is, and I like where I can put it because it's very ergonomic whenever I'm gripping, just to be able to hit the thumb switch. But whenever I had the 512 model, this one right here, it was in the way. So I'll go ahead and show that because this thing is pretty easy to take off. So with the taller Eotech models, this isn't an issue, but if you have a flashlight that mounts, or really anything, like say you want to mount a like a PEC 15 or an IR laser, something like that, you know, something like this hollow sun. This is the, I think it's LS117 model. If you wanted to mount that on top of your rail, you're not going to get a whole lot of clearance whenever you run a lower optic like this one. It's on here. You can see it's on top. Now, if I turn this on, make sure you can actually see. I don't know if you'll be able to see down this or not, but whenever you see the reticle, you can see the flashlight takes up a good third, maybe a fourth of the window. And this is not focusing on that reticle at all, so don't take this to be what the reticle actually looks like. I'll turn it down some. That's better. Okay, so whenever you're aiming, it's perfectly centered. The reticle just sits right above that light. So that gives you an idea of how low the reticle is with this. Now, it still works, and if you're target focusing or threat focusing like you're supposed to be doing, which means both eyes are open, you're looking at your target, and essentially the dot is just in the way, so it just looks like the dot appears on the person, then that doesn't matter. But say if you have a magnifier or something behind there, like I do on this other rifle, it matters. So whenever you have this on here and you're using it as a red dot, it's not really a big deal, but it's kind of obnoxious. It's just in the way, and I like having a clear field of view through there. I don't like having a bunch of stuff blocking my vision. But if you have a magnifier on there, this thing just gets in the way. It's not a huge deal. You can still use it, but you just got this blurry blob at the bottom. And the same would be true if you use something like this on the top rail at the 12 o'clock position. So just know if you're going to mount a bunch of stuff all over your gun, especially if you're going to mount it on the top rail, just know that this may not be the optic for you for that reason. That's the reason, again, why I bought this QD mount, Eotech, the EXPS-2. It's a little bit more expensive, but it clears all of the stuff on the top rail. You still see it ever so slightly in the bottom, but it's not really in the way at all. So that's the reason why I got that. And now the other reason why I say this isn't actually worth the money currently. So this thing on the market right now is worth about $450, or what it cost. And to me, that's overpriced. A year ago, 2 years ago, before all the crazy gun panic stuff started happening, you can find these things for, you know, somewhere around the $350 mark. That's usually around where they settled. I was able to find these on sale a couple of years ago during a Black Friday sale, and Eotech also had a rebate, a mail-in rebate for I think like $75 or something. So I was actually able to get two of them. So I got one of them for around $275, and that was the Realtree version, which I guess no one wanted, but I'm not afraid of using spray paint on my stuff, so I just spray painted it. Didn't care. Looked fine. Spray painted it black. And then the other one I got was, I think, right around $300 with the rebate, something like that. So you can find these really cheap whenever prices aren't crazy. So in the current market, it's not worth $450 because you can get something like this for around $550. So for another $100, I got this one from Euro Optics a couple of months, maybe about a month ago, something like that. And it was a demo model, but it was, you know, listed as like new. And I got it for around $550 shipped, which for another $100, like, definitely get this one right here. Now, if you can't find one for that good of a deal, then, you know, it's up to you. Now, I realize these optics aren't cheap, and the point of this channel is for cheap optics, but for an Eotech, this is about as cheap as you can get normally. So $275 to $300, you know, if you find them on sale, obviously not in the current prices. That's that's affordable. A lot of good optics out there are around the $200 to $300 range, so that's in the ballpark of those. So I'll go over the specs real quick, and then I'll talk about some other things I like and don't like about it. So the one thing that stands out to me about it specifically is the reticle. So as you can see, or should be able to see, I'll take this off so you have a clearer view. So as you can see on the reticle, hopefully you can see that, the reticle is a large circle, large ring, and then it's got a 1 MOA dot. Technically the dot is less than 1 MOA because it's a laser, but for all intents and purposes it's a 1 MOA dot. That reticle to me is my favorite reticle, and I'll tell you why. So at distance, it doesn't really matter because the ring is so large at distance where it doesn't obscure your target. But up close, say 0 to 50 yards, it really allows you just to pull up on target, and you know, as long as the rings, you know, and circle are around your target and your rings on your target and the dots, you know, somewhere in the middle, you pull the trigger, you know you're hitting. But the nice thing about the circle right there is just when you put it on target, you pull the trigger, you know you're hitting. And I've used a lot of single, just regular red dots that just has a dot. And while that is still faster than iron sights, I notice it's easier to make a, I want to say, more confident shot with the Eotech reticle more quickly. If I'm taking my time, then there's no difference between, you know, the donut of death reticle that the Eotech has versus a red dot. But whenever you're moving around quickly, shooting from odd angles, that circle dot really draws your eye in, and it takes away some of the, at least for me, whenever I'm trying to aim, I'm trying to really steady that dot before I pull the trigger, versus with the Eotech, I just kind of trust it and I just go at it, and I've never noticed a difference in accuracy between the two. So for me, it's faster. So that's a benefit, at least in my mind. The absolute co-witness height, again, that means that if you have iron sights on here, like for instance, you pop these up. This is a Tavor, for those of you who don't know. This is the SAR model, the original model. So if you look at these iron sights, they're actually at the same height as the center of this red dot, or as this holographic sight, which means where you're aiming through here, your cheek weld or your, the way that you would aim, you know, with your cheek on here would be the exact same if you flip up the sights. Nothing changes. There's good and bad about that. So because it's lower mounted on the gun, it's a consistent, you know, cheek weld if you use your iron sights. But a negative about that is you kind of have to squish your face down on the stock a little bit in order to get behind here when in awkward position. So if you're standing and shooting, or kneeling and shooting, and, you know, just like normal, it's fine. Or bench resting, it's fine. You don't notice it. But you do notice it a little bit whenever you're shooting behind barricades, or you're shooting in the prone position, say on your side, or you're trying to shoot around small little holes in your barricade, stuff like that, just weird shooting. It's a little bit more awkward.
2 5 4 4
Still a 1. It's still doable, and the nice thing again about a red dot sight is, as long as your optic is parallax free, which obviously these are I think the most parallax free optics that are out there, just based on the way they're designed. I think red dot sights can't be as parallax free as a holographic sight can be, just because, you know, science. But as long as you can see the reticle in the window, you know it's on target, so you can pull the trigger. So that's not a big deal, but it is nicer to have something higher like this, because you don't have to squish your face as awkward. It's a lot easier to find that reticle whenever you're in awkward positions. So that's something nice about it. And again, if you're not worried about that, then you can get this model, especially if you can find it cheap. So one of the other things that I don't necessarily like about that is if you have a helmet, which, let me grab one. So say if you have a helmet like this one, where you have ear pro mounted. Now this is a regular high cut helmet, so it's not the Maritime. The Maritime one would have this cut right here for the ear pro a little bit higher. So this ear pro would mount a little bit higher on your head, which is, in my opinion, better. But I'm cheap, this is what I got. If you have something like this and you're wearing ear pro, it's harder to get a good cheek weld behind something that's lower like this. So whenever you have a higher optic like this, You don't have to smush your face down as much, which means your ear pro doesn't get in the way as much, which means it's just easier to shoot. Now, it's still completely doable. You can still use a helmet or ear pro like this and still shoot behind there. I do it all the time, but just know it does get in the way more than a higher optic would.
3. 1.
One thing I will say too about this Eotech is, specifically Eotechs, I guess in general, the newer models, you know, like this one right here, you don't have to worry about that. But the models that were, say, made before 2017, I would stay away from those. Whenever you buy one, or if you're looking to buy one, make sure it has a date that was made in 2017 or later, because older Eotechs, and Eotech got sued over this, and they had to give a bunch of people money and return or replace optics for people who qualified. But they would have problems with the reticle, they'd have problems with zero shift in cold and hot weather. So that's something that they've remedied since then, but just make sure that your model, if you get one, is a 2017 production or later. Otherwise, don't buy it. So something people talk about a lot, and this is definitely true. People talk about the reticle being grainy, and you probably won't be able to see in this picture, but you can see it's kind of fuzzy, and it's not nearly as fuzzy in real life. It's much clearer in real life, but it's a bunch of little lasers that make the reticle. So instead of one, I guess, kind of LED light, you know, projecting a clear, crisp image, it's a bunch of little lasers, so it looks like tiny little itty-bitty dots that make up that thing, and that bothers some people. It doesn't bother me. If you're looking at your target and you're threat focusing like you're supposed to, you won't notice it. And actually, whenever I'm aiming properly with this versus something like, say, the Hollow Sun, I don't remember what model it is, but they have the Eotech type reticle in it, I like this better. The regular LED, like from the Hollow Sun, it just seems like it draws my eye to the dot more, and I can't focus on the target as more, versus this one just seems like it's projected on the target itself. So that kind of, in my opinion, I think this is better for that. Even though I like the Hollow Suns with the Eotech reticles, or style reticles, this is still superior in my mind for CQB stuff. Now, whenever you're running a magnifier, whenever you're focused through the magnifier right here, and you're aiming, you notice that graininess a lot more, and it's more distracting. So when I'm using a magnifier, I actually prefer like something like the Hollow Sun that has an imitation Eotech reticle. But whenever I'm using the red dot without a magnifier, I prefer the Eotech reticle. So I don't know, maybe I'm just weird, maybe that's just me, but that's just something to take in consideration. Now granted, whenever you're using a magnifier, you're going to be probably either, you know, on a bench rest, or you're going to be, you know, in the prone position or something else where you're not really worried about speed necessarily. So for me, that's not really that big of a deal, but just know it is kind of there. I do kind of focus on the reticle. It is a little bit distracting when I use magnifier with the Eotech. So there's two other things that I don't like about this model. Now one, it is not NVG compatible, so it doesn't have any night vision settings. So on some of the other models, this button right here, which this is not a button, it's just a plastic cap, this would be your night vision mode. This doesn't have night vision. Again, it's a cheaper Eotech, so it doesn't have night vision. And the buttons are on the back. So here's your down, then here's your up button, so you can make it brighter, which, let's see if you can see it. So you can make it brighter, you can see it gets bright, or it gets dim. Now to turn it off, you just hit both buttons at the same time and it'll turn off. If you hit the up button, it automatically makes it turn on for 8 more hours and it has an auto shut off. If you hit the down button, it makes it turn on for 4 hours and then it has an auto shut off. And the battery life on these is not as good as, say, modern LED holographic sights are, but that's just because the technology is different. It uses more power. That's just, it is what it is. One negative thing about having the buttons on the back like that versus something like the EXPS version where it has the buttons on the side is whenever you mount your, make sure you get this in frame here, whenever you mount your magnifier off to the side, or whenever you have it on here. So notice on here I can have very little space and I don't have to get in here to push those buttons. So I noticed with some other magnifiers, not this one specifically, but it's really hard to get to the buttons on the back of the Eotech 512 model because the magnifier is so close. So you actually have to mount the magnifier farther back, make it a bigger space, and then your Eotech ends up sitting forward more on the rail instead of on the receiver. And that's bad because your rail can twist So that's a negative with having the buttons on the back like this one. So is that a big deal? I mean, not really, because this thing is already pretty thick, pretty chunky. And you can see it takes up a lot of space on this rail. If you were to hold it up, let me see if I can give this comparison. So if you were to put this on an AR, you can see right where it would be at. It's hanging off clearly out to about here on your rail. So it takes up a lot of space. So that's another negative about the 512 model. Now, if you don't have a bunch of stuff on your gun, then it won't be that big of a deal. But if you are mounting tons of gadgets and gizmos all over your gun, then you're probably going to want a different model other than this one. Again, this model is basically made for budget-minded. The thing weighs 11.2 ounces, which is really heavy compared to most optics. A lot of other optics weigh like half that. So just know that if you're trying to build like a lightweight AR, which is what this gun is, or it was, this was my lightweight build. As you can see, it doesn't have a forward assist. You know, it's got a lightweight handguard, it's got a pencil barrel. It's a very thin, lightweight gun. But because of that, I was able to actually put the heavier Eotech on there with a magnifier and everything, which adds weight, sure, so it makes it, you know, heavier. But because my gun was lighter to begin with, this extra weight makes it weigh about the same as a normal AR. But if you have, say, a normal AR and you put all this stuff on it, it's going to be heavy. So just know that if you put an Eotech on your gun, you're going to notice the weight difference. It's about 5.6 inches long, about 2 inches wide, 2.5 inches tall. It is waterproof up to 10 meters, so that's cool. So, or 10 feet, not 10 meters. So if you go, you know, scuba diving or whatever, it's not going to work for you. But if, you know, you just fall in a puddle, you're going to be fine. It has half MOA adjustments, you know, up and down, left and right, which is adequate enough, in my opinion. I've never needed quarter MOA adjustments. It has 20 daylight settings, so obviously it doesn't have night vision, but it has 20 adjustments for daylight. I pretty much always use the brighter ones. You can use the dimmer ones, you know, at night or whatever. But that's one thing I like about it is a lot of other optics I've used, cheaper optics, only have, you know, maybe 10 settings or even less. And so you're pretty much stuck with cranking it all the way up all the time, versus the Eotech will actually get too bright in daylight, which is, you know, nice having that option. The battery life on these things are not great. On setting 12, if you use lithium batteries, you get 2,500 hours of life. If you use alkaline, you get 2,200 hours of life, which is not a lot. That's roughly 3.5 months of being left on solid, which again, it has an auto shut-off feature. So I don't know if that's a big deal to you and you don't have AA batteries sitting around, then I don't know what to tell you. I think it's fine for me, you know, 4 times a year to swap out 2 AA batteries. Not a big deal. I would suggest using lithium batteries in these though, because regular alkaline batteries will always leak, especially if you're not using them. So if you know, put them in your gun, put it in your safe, you go back 6 months later to take it to the range, you have battery acid leaking all over the place. And you can buy the replacement battery compartments for these, and it comes off pretty easily. I'll show you that real quick. So all you do is lift up on here, and this battery compartment will just slide out. So it's pretty easy. You just put it back on. You just put it on. Hopefully you can see this. Put it back on, and it just kind of wedges its way back forward. So it's really easy to change batteries. Not a big deal. And also the fact that it uses AA batteries, if you're worried about, say, long-term situation, whatever, finding batteries for this is pretty easy, because AA batteries are probably the most common batteries out there. The reticle on it actually is, it's useful for range finding, kind of. The dot, if you zero it in at 50 yards, the dot will be on at 50 and 20, or 200, obviously, that's your basic zero. The bottom of the circle, if you have it sighted in for 50 yards, the bottom of the circle is your aiming point at 7 yards. So say CQB, you know, if you're room clearing, whatever, you're going to aim with the bottom of the reticle. The dot, as I said before, it's a 1 MOA dot. Technically, it's smaller than that, and it's a 68 MOA ring. And the nice thing about the reticle, which I didn't actually know, I found this out recently, is the ring itself. So your average person is about 5'8". So if you're looking at somebody through the reticle, or using the reticle, and you're looking at someone at 100 yards, they should fill up the entire reticle. Like the bottom of their feet will be the bottom of the reticle, their head will be at the top of the reticle. So that is a good way to judge how far away someone is, so you know your holdover. If they're at 200 yards, they'll take up half of the reticle. And then it goes out to 400 yards. You can look on our website and see that. But really, if you don't have a magnifier and you're shooting at something past 200 yards, it's kind of dumb because you can't identify what it is. But at 200 yards, again, their head would basically be where the dot is, and then their feet would be the bottom of the reticle, and that gives you, say, an idea of where to hold, because, oh, okay, they're 200 yards. So that's kind of neat. Again, I really wouldn't, this is, I don't know, maybe a weird review where I'm telling you not to buy it right now. Wait to buy one, or if you're dead set on buying an Eotech right now, don't buy this model, buy a nicer model like the EXPS-2 or just the XPS-2, which I have right here. So you can see the XPS-2 model is essentially the same as the EXPS, except it doesn't have the QD mount. And you can tell this one is significantly smaller, and this one's really, right now, I think it's only around $50 more. So honestly, I would say get this one, especially if you're going to mount a bunch of stuff all over your gun, like I do on mine. But again, here's kind of the problem. You can reach in there, but I could actually put this magnifier all the way up against this if the buttons were on the side. So the window on these things are absolutely huge. Now, a lot of people will make a big deal of that, and it is helpful to have a large window. But again, if you're threat focusing like you're supposed to be doing, the size of the window really is irrelevant. But whenever you're focusing on something, like saying you're sighting on your gun, or you're really wanting to focus on something, it is nice to have a larger field of view on your red dot, because it obscures your target less. So if you're aiming at someone that's, say, 15 yards away, something like that, and you're aiming at them, and your reticle, or not your reticle, but if your optic has a small window, you're going to be covering up part of their body, and if they're holding a weapon, they're holding a knife, you may not be able to see that as well if the optic covers that up, versus if it has a large window like this does, you can see your target better, and that will just cover up your target a little bit less, so you can kind of see more of what's going on. But really, and for most practical situations, the size of the window doesn't really matter. So hopefully this answered some questions if you all had, or you're looking into getting a 512 model Eotech. Again, right now, I wouldn't suggest buying one in the current market. I'd get one of the nicer versions. But this is still, if you can find it, under $400, it's still a pretty decent buy. But hopefully this helped you all out. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below. If you like this kind of content, give us a subscribe, like the video. That helps us a lot. I hope you all have a good one.